Hey, everybody, welcome back to another post-status event. I've got a friend of mine that I've met over the last 6+ months now, and we have very similar passions and heart around this subject for sure, and also for entrepreneurs where we kind of initially got started. But today we're going to be talking about groups, specifically peer groups and facilitating groups, something both my guest and I have done prolifically. He is classically and professionally trained at stuff like this, so I'm excited to dive in. But my name is Corey Miller. I think my title today is publisher of Post Status, and but this is a key subject for me that I wanted to have because groups, peer groups, and Corey knows the story very well, have had a life-changing impact on my life. And I've been in one group in particular for 10+ years now. I dropped out for a year and then basically begged them to come back in. But that group of entrepreneurs, men and women, around 9 of us now, has fundamentally changed my life. So I've told Corey this and others for the longest time. I want to figure out how to get groups into WordPress community, particularly at Post Status. And this is kind of setting that stage for that. So Corey, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself, background, and then tying with your connection to groups and what you've done with groups?
Yeah, so my name is Dr. Corey Wilks. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and professionally trained executive coach. I spent a lot of my time working in integrated primary care as a therapist, and I ran a lot of groups from the therapy side. And then in December 2020, I left the therapy world to go into executive coaching, got some extra training to do that. And now I have been coaching and currently run a cohort-based course, which is essentially, large format group coaching for entrepreneurs who have basically wanting to be more intentional with how they live, work, and create. And I use a lot of my psychology background to help them do that. So I'm excited to be here to help you all kind of help share what I've learned both personally and professionally, and kind of how to run groups well so that people get the transformation, they kind of sign up to achieve.
That was me. So I just put the link to Corey's website in the chat, and you can go there and check out his stuff. And the value-based cohort he's got going is rocking. I'm a part of that, and I just love his approach and everything. So, you are, I know as a psychologist, have been trained through groups and peer groups. I mean, you just look at AA, and it's a prolific model within AA itself, and then all the other groups that aren't AA. Particularly in mental health, addiction, and recovery spaces. But like, I go back to Sunday school groups when I was a kid. The classroom, small groups of people, cohorts, but oftentimes peer-to-peer, maybe there's a facilitator, in groups. And like I said in the intro, they've had a profound, one particular type of group, I should say, has had a profound impact on my life. And that's the Entrepreneurs Organization Forum. So I'll share my little experience with that, and then we can get into some approaches. But my background has been so life-changing for me, has been the EO networks, forum groups. So I got placed in Forum 2 in Oklahoma City, where my chapter is. And I've been with this group for 10+ years now, taking a little bit of a couple of times off, but mostly same with this group for, 11 or 12 years now. And the premise of the EO forum groups is we're all peers. Even if your company is $150 million and mine is 3, it doesn't matter. We're all peers, and we say it as Gestalt, Corey, and I know you and I've talked about this, but the premise of how you're supposed to approach the talk is not, hey, here's what you should do, Corey. It's, Corey, you were talking about this. Here's a parallel experience from my life that I'll share, and then you get to pull the truth from it for yourself. That alone, the support and camaraderie and encouragement from like-minded peers on the same or similar path with this kind of, I think it's safe. It's safe when I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not presuming I'm better than you or anything like that, but I'm like just trying to share as authentically as I can the experience that I had so you can draw your truth. And this goes back to when I started doing some work around all of this, Corey. It went back to Benjamin Franklin, and he had a group called the Juntos group. And I think he drew it from Spanish, but Portuguese is the way I think of it, and it just means the word together. In fact, one of my Slacks was called Juntos before we made Slack public or premium, excuse me. At Post Status, we had a private Slack called Juntos for that very reason of together. But that's my background a little bit with groups, and I found why I found them life changing. And I'm telling you, like in that one group, we've been through all sorts of just life together, and it's incredible to have a group of peers that you can count on. Like they're the people that if the proverbial, you know, crap hits the fan, I could call them at any point. Now I don't call them every single time, but they're dear friends. They pour into my life, I pour into their life, but it's never this I'm better than you kind of aspect. And gosh, there's so many parts of that. But that's what I wanted to give Post Status, WordPress, and everybody I've been involved with, because I've had so much benefit from it. But from your perspectives, some of the benefits of groups, and maybe we should say in, you know, peer groups, either they're facilitated or not facilitated, but the power of peer groups.
Yeah, so that's a good distinction because there are a lot of different types of groups, right? And I think for the purposes of Post Status, we're talking specifically about peer support groups. So the dynamics are going to be a little different because, you know, some you may have closed versus open groups. So a closed group is it is the same people over and over and over again, and you don't let in new people very often, right? If at all, depending on the group. Versus, and that you can have a lot of intimacy, so you are much more comfortable being vulnerable because it's the same people over and over again. You've built up a lot of trust. Open groups, which is sorry, you referenced AA. A lot of, not all, but some AA groups are open, right? Which means anybody can come in at any time. And that is really good, especially if you have like a higher turnover in your group. And if you just want new blood often, but sometimes that can be a struggle for people who are more conservative with how they share. So I think that is an important distinction when you're thinking of what kind of group to create is how often can new people come in. But when it comes to just groups in general, one thing that I think just to start out with, just so you come into it with the right mindset of what a group actually, what it means to facilitate a group, is there's a difference between giving advice, being a consultant, and being a coach, right? So, you know, again, coming from the therapy world and now coaching, a lot of people think, oh, I can do that. It's just giving advice. It's just talking to people and giving advice. It isn't typically, because when you give advice, that means you essentially want somebody else to do it the way you would have done it, or you think they should do it, right? And that isn't very effective, right? Like, and even, you know, I'll have my friends, they'll ask me, you know, a question. I'm like, okay, do you want psychologist Corey to answer this, or do you want friend Corey to answer this? Because the answer may not be the same, right?
Yeah.
You're not just giving advice, right? Because a lot of times we try to like shove or force our opinion on somebody else. Okay. So when we are talking today about facilitation, we're not talking about just giving advice. Okay. Consultation, typically the main difference between a consultant and a coach is a consultant gives answers versus a coach asks questions. Okay. A big assumption that a lot of coaches make is that the clients, in this case, the other people in your group, they are sort of the experts in their own lives. They relatively know what they should do, but maybe they need a nudge, or maybe they need the right question to help them develop insight. Okay, so you're not trying to force people into a certain way. You're not trying to, you know, sort of exert your opinion on others so much as what questions can I ask that can help facilitate, which is the key theme of today, facilitate what the people in this group actually need. Okay, so these are important things, just very foundational for when you're creating a group, just for you as the leader or as the key facilitator, just mentally for you to go into this. Your job isn't to force feed your opinions to people. It isn't to dole out answers the entire time. It is largely to ask the right questions, to do what's called active listening, to listen very well, very deeply, so you can help make connections so that you know the right question to ask next, so that the group can have a dialogue. That's facilitation.
Yeah, and I like that distinction, and I'm glad you brought it up because it's not called leader, it's not called some grand title, it's facilitator or coach or whatever in a lot of these groups. For instance, in my EO forum group, we call them moderator. All you're doing is moderating the conversation. But I have a friend who's in a business group, kind of an accelerator type program, and it's supposed to be a coaching group similar to these. And instead, she said the facilitator talks the whole time. So it's not Oprah or it's not a talk show in the sense of like the lead person is going to do, well, I guess it is a talk show in a sense, but the lead person is not supposed to dominate the conversation or just dole out advice. That's where you get this mismatch. So I've seen a lot of these kind of peer support groups, is why we keep saying peer support groups, meaning I'm not here, you're not here. I don't look at you and act toward you. We're on the same plane. That goes for the facilitator and moderator. And I'll tell you, part of my entrepreneur group, it made it. It helped me feel not defensive. I feel safe. Doesn't make me feel like I'm less than or even more than. It's just that it doesn't matter about any of the numbers or the situation. When we walk in the room, we're equals. And I think that's a really critical points to these. Is one is not dictating the conversation and being equal. And there's, bringing pride and hubris into these groups is not going to be conducive to a safe environment where everybody wants to share and open up. What I think about these groups too, and I want to talk about outcomes next, Corey, like the different types of groups and what kind of outcomes you're trying to get a part of it. But sorry, just lost my train of thought. But the outcome side of all of these things is like, for instance, it's pretty clear with my EO forum group. Now I'd like to, from your experience or your current cohort, I'd love for you to share what some of those outcomes are. Mm-hmm. But the outcomes I would say for the group I've been in and helped start 2 more and just volunteered to do more actually this coming year because they've had that, again, such a profound impact is, it's supporting and camaraderie. It's being human to each other and lowering shields. Like, to me, I boil it down and I go, that's it. It's sharing of yourself in a very safe manner for both everybody involved. Mm-hmm. That makes and enriches people's lives, but that it's not a dictating type of thing. So that's the base feature. I think sometimes of those groups, it's hard because I'm like, it's supporting camaraderie. It's friendship. It's what I think of as true friendship. Don't put your bias, try to check your bias at the door and just share your truth with me. Don't tell me what to do. Just listen, active listening, like you said. And I think that is a profound part of any relationship, by the way. I've taken principles from this, but the outcome truly, I think, is learn and grow together, which is what our format at PostStats is: give, grow together, which is what cohorts or peer groups all fit within this model. But what are some of the outcomes that you're doing now or have done or see as part of a peer support group? Like, do you think in your experience they need a specific focus? Like, what's the anxiety peer support group, or it's the business peer support group, or what are your thoughts about outcomes and setups of groups?
Mm-hmm. So the first question I always ask, I do what psychologists call a functional analysis. It sounds complicated, it isn't. All you ask is, what is the function that this thing is supposed to serve? Okay. So in this case with a group, what function does the group serve? What is the point? What is the purpose of the group? Okay. So with my course, for example, the function is to facilitate this very specific transformation that people sign up for. So the question is, how do I facilitate that? So with my course, we do like 2-hour sessions, kind of like this, what we're doing today. But for every hour, I'm only talking maybe 15 to 20 minutes. The other 40 or more is them doing something, right? Having a conversation, some sort of discussion, whatever. So mine isn't like fully a group. There is a lecture component to it. However, I try to talk as little as possible because nobody wants to be lectured to. We disconnect, right? So the more interactive you can make it, the better you're actually facilitating that transformation. Okay. So again, if the function of the group is to have this outcome achieved, then always asking, okay, how can I achieve that outcome? Is it lecturing for 45 minutes, right? Because you talked about earlier, the one person, the group they did, the facilitator, in air quotes, is just lecturing for an hour, or they're talking the whole time, right? If you're talking the entire time, you're not facilitating, you are lecturing, right? And that isn't what people signed up to do. So as far as outcomes, what I have seen is the less I can talk, the more effective the session is. Because the session isn't about me. It isn't about stroking my ego or me monologuing, right? Which is ironic because you and I are talking this whole time. But that isn't the point, right? So every time I want to talk more, the question is this serving a function? Is this actually helping the group members get further? Or is it just me talking because I like to hear myself talk, right? That's a really important question I ask myself all the time, because it's easy for us to get wrapped up and just talk way too long because we're excited about it, but it may not be relevant for the group, right? So the less you talk as a facilitator, that means you're giving other people room to talk. The more other people talk, so classic example with coaching or with therapy. If I tell you what to do, even if it is objectively what you should do, I have robbed you of agency. I have robbed you of the ability to own your answer because you didn't create it. I handed it to you. So you have no ownership. Versus if I ask you the right questions and create this dialogue with you to help you process your own thinking around it, and then you come to the same conclusion, well, now you own it because you came up with it. So you are much more likely to feel the impact, the power of whatever that solution is because you came up with it. Okay. So as a facilitator, that is your role, is to facilitate, not to do, not to lecture. Right.
Mm.
So whatever the outcome is that your group signed up for, generally the less you talk and the more you can have them talk or practice or do an exercise, the more powerful of an impact it'll have long term.
I think this is a huge distinction. After being in my forum for so long and being trained in some of these thoughts here, I realize that when people ask me questions, I typically just end up sharing my experience or want to share my experience because I think it's so much more profound. If you said, hey, I need to get in shape, tell me how to take care of myself, get in shape, I'd be like, okay, here's your plan. Here's your 5-day plan. But in reality, do I live that out? No. So I know it, but but what have I done? Well, I'll tell you what I've done in the past is a 5K couch to 5K program. And it worked great for me. And one thing I realized as I was running was like, there wasn't a pass fail. I won every time. And when I got to where I couldn't run, I just walked and it was no big deal. Nobody died, nothing but that little couch 5K program helped me get moving. And once I got moving, it kept me moving until I stopped. And so that's totally like advice. You go, well, I'm a know-it-all, but have I done it? And I think we can all sit there and go, hey, Corey, are you getting your 16 ounces of water a day? That's one thing. You better be doing that. Well, how many ounces have I, Corey Miller, drank today? 0. I've had 2 cups of coffee, So, but see, I think there's something more human in this, just sharing your experiences. And I think that's pretty critical. But back to the outcome. So you need to know what your outcome is. It's like you said with your cohort, you are facilitating a specific transformation, which I think is critical. As I've thought about the groups I've tried to get off the ground or wanted to get off the ground, particularly with post status, I try to look at for an aim, like what is that specific transformation? But in the peer support group, you think about like it goes for, I keep referencing AA, but I think they have cornered the market and done it well, better than anybody ever that I can, maybe the early, I don't know, but AA groups exist all around the world. And I know I could probably hit 5 today if I wanted to, plus all the other groups around there. It works. Meeting together for a common purpose, for a common meeting with the same values. and works pretty brilliantly. But okay, so we talked about facilitating the conversation. We talked about support and camaraderie. Can you think anything else about the outcomes that groups typically take on?
Yeah. So again, like we keep kind of circling around AA just because it's a super popular group. But the other critical thing with AA, one of the things that makes it successful is with that specific population, there's a lot of stigma, right, around
Mhm.
addiction and recovery and all that other stuff. So when you find that there's a group of people like you are more
Mhm.
likely to join that group, right? Versus, and don't get me wrong, like plenty of groups are run by classically trained professionals, and those are very helpful as well, right? But in the realm of support groups, peer support groups specifically, which is a very specific kind of group, um, it is critical for the people running it to be members of that community, right? Like, so I am not in recovery, right? I have run many addiction recovery groups when I did therapy because I did a lot of addiction treatment, but they were never an AA meeting. It was like a professional running it, and we went over specific things. And then afterward, we had an AA. They had an AA meeting, right? If or an NA meeting, if they wanted to go to it, but it's very different. I do not have that lived experience to connect with people on that specific level. Okay. And that is a critical distinction when we're talking about peer support groups, right? So you're talking about with the other group, it is other people. I know there are like in like revenue thresholds to qualify to be in some of these other groups. That in and of itself is a thing, right? Of like, oh, these other people get what it takes to hit these revenue numbers. They understand the sacrifice, right? I'm sure like I'm sure there are groups where it is like, basically working dads, right? Where, here are fathers who are also entrepreneurs or have, a 60 to 80 hour work week job. There are specific needs for that group that you have much more buy-in as an individual when you realize, oh, everybody else in that group has been through the same things that I've been through. They get it. That is really what a peer support group is a group of other people who, quote, get it right from day one. Again, not every group is like that. There are many different types of groups, but when we're talking specifically about peer support groups, having this common theme that everybody from day one they're all the same, like they all have the same experience on some level. That is really, really powerful for creating what we call rapport, for just building up this trust quickly.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, and okay, we're gonna get into cohesion and vulnerability and all that here pretty soon. Okay, so I want to make a distinction because I think you said something, which is I've been saying peer support group, and you're like, that's a specific one, right? But there's probably another outcome or a type, I guess even a name, I should say, for someone that goes like Ben Franklin's. His, from my understanding, Juntos was he wanted to be around dynamic people. I don't know if they're all leaders, but I would assume most of them from diverse. The way I've kind of read about it is diverse parts of life, education, finance, different, whatever different walks and stuff. And it was meant to share something of that's going on in your life, and that you're knowing for the benefit and edification of everybody around the table. Now that sounds a little bit different than, to me, peer support group. Do you track with that too? Is that a
Yeah,
different
I
kind of
think
thought?
Jutes was more of like a club, which there are subtle distinctions between clubs and groups as far as, we could talk about like rites of passage and rituals and other things like that. But for the purposes of this, um, we can define a group as without it's
Yeah.
irrelevant for the purpose of
Yeah.
this because it's splitting hairs. It's okay.
Yeah.
It is beyond the scope of this conversation.
Yeah. No, that's okay. I think we've covered the outcomes that, we're really centering on, is that connection, camaraderie, and support and encouragement.
Mhm.
Okay. Now let's talk about frameworks, agendas. Every group I've been a part of and helped lead, I've tried to come in with some kind of I think of them as guardrails, but also, just some things to make sure the conversation gets to the critical parts of it.
Mhm.
With my EO forum group, we've had basically what is, I would say, a journal prompt, but it becomes a one sheet. And it's like, that's that we have an agenda. There'll be conversation, presentations, a part of the group, from life, business, whatever you want it to. But we start with an update sheet, to just jog what's going on in our lives, I'll tell you that's been terrifically beneficial for my life. It's reflecting and reviewing, which none of us do. Entrepreneurs, most of us don't do that. But as far as framework and like agendas, what are some common agenda items, frameworks, approaches to in actual group time that you've seen to be beneficial?
Yeah. So I like the idea of like a central theme for the day and then a flexible format, right? So format could, a super basic format is, let's say it's an hour-long session. 5 minutes to just kind of check in, see how everybody's doing. Because again, like as a facilitator, it's important for you to recognize if somebody's having a harder time for that session, or if they had a really good win, or if, just if they're making some progress. That is a good time to do all of that, because that can inform how you approach facilitation throughout that session, right? Because it's just, you need to know where people are at mentally for that session. And people will want to share their wins, or, just update the group on things that can be good. There may be a common thing going on in the world that is going to be top of mind for people, and ignoring that is a disservice to the group. So just being aware of like, is there something that's top of mind for everybody? Because occasionally, rarely, but occasionally, that may be important enough to change the theme of the session. Okay. So just again, to be aware. So a quick check-in. And then I usually will do like maybe 10 or 15 minutes where I will bring up the main theme for the day, right? So whether that is, you're talking about journal prompts, or, depending on the group, sometimes I've found like a TED talk and I have played that. And that's like the theme of the day, right? So for example, one I played a long time ago was Jocko Willink's Extreme Ownership TED talk. It's a super good TED talk if you haven't seen it. And so we watched it. It was like, however, 10, 12 minutes, whatever. And then the rest of the time was talking about what extreme ownership means to us and how we can practice it more in our day-to-day lives. Okay. Because all extreme ownership is just, like stoicism, right? Of like, all this is out of my control, but these few things are within my control. How can I put more of my time, energy, and attention into the few things that are actually within my control, so that I feel a sense of power and agency over what happens in my life? Okay. That's really all extreme ownership is seeing how is this within my control, and how can I exert more of my control over it to have a better outcome, rather than saying, oh, the world happens to me, and then, coming up with excuses, right? That you could do dozens of groups. You could do a whole 3-month group just on the concept of extreme ownership, right? And that was one TED talk for one session, right? So that's one way to do it. Check in, intro, the theme, and then the rest of the time just having people talking about it. I am not a fan of coming in overly prepared, because when you have a rigid agenda, you feel pressure to stick to it. So there are times where you're like, oh, okay, it's 30 minutes after, we have to move on to the next point. Well, but if you're having a really, really good discussion with the group that is beneficial to everybody,
Yeah.
again, what is the function of the group? It's a disservice for you to move on if it is still being valuable to the group. Okay. So I typically like to have like, this is the theme, this is a general format. Here are a couple questions or a couple prompts. But beyond that, I'm going to be doing a lot of active listening to figure out what is a question I can pull out from the discussion to have a second discussion point later on, and just sort of organically flowing through the conversation. Because then it doesn't feel like a class. It's just everybody talking, but talking in a relatively, directed way towards some sort of outcome, to where you're developing insight, you're developing ownership of the changes you need to make, right? So in your example, where you're talking about, trying to get healthier or lose weight or whatever, right? You know, and again, I'm not saying you specifically, but like, I know you have a kid, right? So for you specifically, if you and I were in a group and I was facilitating at some point in the group, because I'm like, oh yeah, Corey, he's got a kid. I could be like, hey, You've talked in earlier groups where your doctor told you, you're on a sort of a slippery slope health wise because you're eating 5 pizzas a day and drinking nothing but Coke and, whatever. They're telling you that, you probably won't live a long life if you continue down this trajectory. How important is it to you to walk your baby girl down the aisle? Right. Well, on that, you're going to be like, oh, it's super important, right? Like that's every daddy's dream, right? So then I would say, okay, well, if you keep on down this path, how likely is it that you would be able to walk her down the aisle? Oh man, not very likely. Like doctor says, I've got like maybe 8 years and she won't be ready, for another 15, right?
Mm.
So then logically, then we can have a discussion around like, what are motivations that are powerful enough to get you over this hump of, oh, I don't know what to do, or oh, it's a lot of effort, right? Like, what is this one thing for you that is important enough for you to get off this fence to actually take action? And that can be a super powerful discussion because I was listening to what else was going on.
So Corey just demonstrated motivational interviewing.
Correct. Good job.
Yeah. I took 1 or 2 semesters of coaching, which is meant to be, by the way, everybody, it was meant to be our first segment of this to build on to group, but I misjudged my calendar and was out of town in the air actually when we had scheduled this, and I was the first one. So that'll be Tuesday, the 24th. There'll be a link, post us. Make sure you come for that because that coaching as a skill is going to be a really good one. But it was meant to be the first one. But on to coaching skills a little bit. I mean, a lot of this that where you're talking about, Corey, it feels a lot like being a true coach, trying to not lead or bias the conversation, but extract like I love that word agency. Every time I hear it in the WordPress world, I have to go Google it again and remember what it means because agency in WordPress means a little differently than what we're talking about. But bringing the power to me, like I have I can't remember how many times coaches and consultants have told me like everything you need is in you already, and it's a powerful concept. But on this whole topic of coaching, I mean, that's really what we're talking about. It's like that big difference between what you were saying when we were talking before we started this, the difference between a coach and a consultant. There's a vast difference. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, a consultant, your primary role is you are the expert telling somebody what they should do based on best practices. Okay. It's also why you can make a lot more money as just calling yourself a consultant, because you're like, hey, let me just spoon feed you everything you need to do. And then you just go out and do it, right? Here's all the workbooks, here's all the plans, here's all the everything of how you should do every little thing. That's fine in certain situations. But if you're trying to do a group, being a consultant, you're not actually running a group. Again, you're just lecturing people, telling them what they should do. You're not actually giving them the opportunity to have that ownership or to build that trust in themselves that they are capable of doing something, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with being a consultant, right? Like plenty of times where being a consultant is very warranted, right?
Yes. Yes.
But when it comes to running a group, consultants that you're not running it, like you may be running a training on, here's how to do this, right? So in a meta way, I am acting as more of a consultant in that here's how you run a group, here are best practices, right? But it isn't really a discussion necessarily with other people on this call, right? Or watching it, or, who would watch the replay, right? It's mostly me saying, this is what you should do. This is what I did, right? There aren't a lot of questions being asked. There's not a lot of facilitation of your specific transformation. It's more so me just info dumping on you and telling you what you should and shouldn't do, right? That can be helpful if you legitimately just want the answers of like, hey, I know it's super important to be a coach or to run groups. I just want to know how and what traps to avoid. Totally cool. Right. But when you're trying to build a sense of safety so that people can open up and feel vulnerable, in my CBC yesterday, we had a session and we were talking about, just because it was relevant to like limiting beliefs and personal narratives and self-sabotaging behaviors and things as major obstacles that hold entrepreneurs back. We ended up, a couple of us, because I modeled the way, not as a narcissist, but as a way to just like, I can't expect you to be vulnerable if I'm not willing to share my own stuff, right? A couple of us talked about traumas and how that affected us early on, and how that kind of caused this negative personal narrative we told ourselves, which held us back for years. And then we kind of processed, here's how I overcame it, right? And it became a very vulnerable conversation for people, because people felt safe and they opened up. That you can really only do if you're nailing facilitation, if people are feeling safe, if people are feeling like you're listening to them, if they feel like they can share a part of themselves without being judged. And your job as the facilitator is to make sure that you create that environment by listening. If somebody is a little too critical, by trying to kind of deal with that group dynamic and calling on people. I called on a couple of people who were like more of like the wallflowers, right? And I asked for permission. I was like, if you don't want to talk, do not feel pressured to, but I want to give you the opportunity to talk. And the two quote unquote wallflowers I called on talked for a long time, right? It wasn't that they were afraid to, they just didn't. But as soon as I gave them that opportunity, they were like, oh shit, this is great, right? And they really opened up. That is the mark that you have facilitated appropriately, because people feel safe to open up and talk and connect with each other.
It occurred to me as we're talking about coaching and then just all the group dynamics we're talking about that I wrote this down. So this is raw when I say this, but I want to get your feedback. One of the most incredible ways to learn leadership is actually facilitating a group that you're not the designated, you don't have power or authority, spoken, written, formal power, authority. I'd even say maybe informal, but like you're truly, we talk about this phrase with entrepreneurs. It's like leading entrepreneurs is like herding cats. There's no way like you can do that. I think, Corey, that when we talk about groups from this standpoint, it's such an amazing model of coaching leadership, of actual true. I think some of the best leadership that could happen on the planet is when we approach it like a group. Hey, they don't have to show up, but should they want to show up? Should we have as much value as we can out of this, that we get the nailed, outcome that we're trying to do? And man, I don't know. What do you think about that?
So I've gotten this question a couple of times, as far as like, how can I be a better leader? Right. A lot of people, they think of like, oh, Steve Jobs, just be an asshole to everybody. Right.
Right.
And that's one way. You
Right.
don't necessarily instill a lot of loyalty that way. Fear, I mean, you can rule by fear, totally.
Yeah.
It's viable. But a better way is saying, okay, again, what is the function of a leader? Like, what is my role? What purpose do I serve? Right. The main function of a leader is to empower their team, again, to be autonomous, right? So a lot of people I work with, they say, well, I have this larger team, but I hate micromanaging. Okay, well, you're assuming you have to micromanage to be a leader, or you have to be bossy to be a leader. But in reality, a lot of effective leaders say, how can I empower my team by giving them the skills, the training, and the support that they need to then go out and execute effectively, right? So it isn't either I micromanage or I'm like the super cool boss who like lets everybody run all over me and do whatever. It's like, no. There's this in between where you empower them to be autonomous, right? So then it's a matter of, how do you do that? And one way is by employing a lot of these group facilitation skills, coaching skills, that kind of thing. Because at the core of facilitation and coaching in general is helping somebody else take ownership of the changes they claim they want to make. That's everything else is in service to that goal. Oh, you say you want to get healthier. You say you want to be a better leader. You say this, say that. Cool. My role is to help you get there by asking the right questions, by creating a safe environment for you to open up, and help you kind of dig in to your own motivations, your own roadblocks, and helping you recognize what are your strengths, what can you pull from your experiences, right? And then maybe bringing in other people, again, in the group setting, so that everybody can share. Because when you feel like you're not alone, a lot of other things open up. Because again, you're talking about entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship for a lot of people is a very lonely road, right? A lot of people don't get it. And a lot of us come from upbringings or from, IRL friend groups who aren't entrepreneurs. So it is really easy to feel alone. Like, I kind of glossed over this in my like intro for today, but like when I left therapy, it was a combination of, I got fired because I had a telehealth job and my employer quit supporting telehealth. And I had another job lined up, but decided to not do it because I realized I was so burnt out. So I lost my job and had like 3 paychecks of runway and no other job opportunities. And for the last, year and a half, I have sort of Frankenstein together an entrepreneurial journey for myself. I never knew anybody who was in business before, but through the groups that I have joined over the last year and a half, both formal and informal, that gave me the strength and the support to continue on this journey, because otherwise I would have questioned myself way more, because I'm like, I have no models for this actually working out. I don't know any specific people who have made this work. So this could all just be a pipe dream because people like me can't do this, right? In air quotes. Having a group, a group of peers there to support you helps you not feel alone, and it helps you
Mhm.
process your own roadblocks with other people, and it gives you the opportunity to help other people with their own roadblocks. That is why groups are so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I mean, it's what's helped promote the species to where we are today, I'd say, is, doing it together. So that's incredible. Um, all right. If you have any questions for Corey, post those in the chat or the Q&A and we'll get to those. But okay, so we've talked about outcomes. We've talked about some of the frameworks and agenda, really get into the coaching where we're asking questions. We're not advising. We're not telling. We're trying to elicit, draw out from the others what they're trying to do. And really, to your point too, is this in the service of what the group is here for? And I think that's a valuable thing. um in my group, I think there's 3 categories. It's like business, buddies, and something else. It's like, we would do this annual thing survey and just see where we are and I always skewed toward the buddies. I was like, but I want the business. So I think having some specific function stated clearly is huge. Drawing in coaching skills, we're going to talk more about on next Tuesday here at Post Tennis. What else have we missed here, Corey?
So when you're actually coming up with the group, I think it's just important to communicate who is the group for. And more
Mhm,
importantly, a lot of times is who's the group not for,
mhm,
right? Because the everybody's familiar with the term niche, right? Like a group is essentially niched down, right? Like with AA, like is your group for people who are in recovery, often from alcohol, sometimes from other substances, versus NA, right? A lot of times people gravitate toward NA because maybe there's less of a religious association, or maybe because some NA is a little more open to, if you're on certain medication assisted therapies like Suboxone and things. It depends, right? Is this group for entrepreneurs who make 1 million or more? Is it for solopreneurs? Is it for CEOs? Is it for tech CEOs? Like, what is it, right? Because again, it's part of that from like a peer support group is, are these my people from day one? That can be, again, depending on the kind of group you want to run, that can be an important distinction for some people, right? Or, I see people all the time that they're running like men's groups or working fathers groups, right? That tells you exactly what it is. Right now, working dads is not a homogenous group. Like there's tons of diversity within that, right? But it gives you an idea of like, oh, okay, so if this is me, then I'm probably not a good fit for the group, or the group isn't a good fit for me, right? That can just, you don't have to niche down super hard necessarily, but having some just parameters can be really helpful.
I think you're right. As much as I haven't always appreciated it's $1 million sales revenue per year to get into EO. It is a a good sorting filter for if you're at that level, you've got these sets of common experiences.
Mhm.
And it's like you said, I like that. yeah, you said, for instance, you don't have kids right now. So working dads group might not, fit. A working, coaches group, solopreneur group, yeah, or work
Mhm.
from home solopreneur group, maybe different stories. So I think we got affinities, we got interests in there, goals, like you said, for that specific transformation that you're trying to do with your cohort.
Mhm.
And could you tell me the name of your cohort again?
It's called intentional life design.
Yeah,
That's just it's a 5-week cohort based course.
yeah. So I like having that as an example too. So cohorts are a little different in that my understanding is that you're really supposed to learn and grow together. Like there's probably some content in there. And the idea is like, I know Seth Godin's doing this a lot through some of his virtual and in-person endeavors, is that cohort model where truly you think about education, we're sitting in the same class. Why aren't peers learning from peers? That's profound, for me. I've learned more about business from those entrepreneurs and other entrepreneurs I've been experienced with in life with than I ever have from a book. You
Mhm.
know, just this is the real life application of it.
Well, and so like I can drop it in the chat for anybody who's curious. Because we'll be doing cohort 2 probably at the end of the summer. But so, and we can have a different conversation about like CBCs or cohort based courses separately if people want. But the main difference between like a cohort based course and just like group coaching, a lot of group coaching, you do it in cohorts, right? Of like, oh, this is my group that runs through September. This is my group that runs through, for 3 weeks or whatever. But there's really no continuity between groups. You just like each group is separate, right? The way a CVC works is you have that group and each group is separate, but you typically have some sort of community that ties everybody together in between, right? So like for mine, this is the first cohort. When the second cohort comes through, then everybody in the first cohort will be like, there's like the shared community where everybody can talk and hang out, right? So they're not like, they have they can be vulnerable and have the space for privacy and confidentiality on a per group basis, but then they also get funneled into basically like an alumni network afterwards. So then they, so cohort 2 can meet people who have already gone through intentional life design and overcome limiting beliefs or whatever. So that is just one way that I distinguish it, because a CBC, you do teach a little bit more. It isn't just a discussion the entire time, but the best CBCs are very focused on application and discussion rather than just lecture. But again, like we can go more into that another time if your community wants it. It's up to you all.
We could do that because I think, as we talked about with post status, might be a great way to start into some of these. Is more CBC model where it's like come around a topic, for instance, that you want to interact with, and then show people how like this could be a peer, there could be a peer group that kind of spins out of this. But I love the CBC alumni model too, because you're learning and you're having these great experiences with other people, but you're staying with them in the sense of the community. And probably as you rotate out with CBCs, you're going to have this great, awesome community. Love what you're thinking here, but of connected individuals. Like it's about the experience. And to me, I think about from a business standpoint, post status or any business, like you benefit from having some sort of group structure because it's part of the social glue that I mean, it's just the fabric of being a human is that we learn better in groups. Like I've learned a lot about groups today too. I've heard you, I hope you've seen another perspective when you probably know everything I've talked about, but like, being able to be in a social circle of people that have your best, it's positive. There's some boundaries that are clear to everybody where not to go to. That can be such a transformative experience. So,
Well, and again, and like we're talking about whether it's a group or a CBC, like I have 2 students right now in my course, and they are both, experts in like Kajabi or something, right? I have no expertise in Kajabi. And that's super cool because it's like my job, like that isn't my job. Like my job is to just facilitate, communication and dynamics, right? So it's like, oh, hey, so-and-so, this person also is a Kajabi expert and, they're looking for help or, maybe collaboration or whatever. And I just kind of, again, I facilitate that. right? Or we have a discussion and then organically people are like, oh, holy crap. Like, you do this. Oh, me too. Oh, you're in New Zealand. Me too. We should meet up. Right. Like, I'm not forcing anything. Your job isn't to force, it is to facilitate. Just like, hey, here's what's out there. And let your students who are experts of their own lives, the other members of
Yeah.
your group, let them have that power, that sense of freedom to kind of go out and do their own thing.
Awesome. All right, Doc. Thanks for your time today. Before I say kind of wind it up and mention next week, anything else that we missed that you think we should talk about, or that you just a saved round you wanted to mention as we kind of wrap things up today?
No, I think we'll go super in depth with the coaching stuff Tuesday. So I don't want to take too much from that. So no, for today, unless people have specific questions, no, I'm good.
Yeah. Be sure you come Tuesday the 24th for our next round, which we'll be talking about coaching as a skill. You're not going to want to miss that. I've done a couple of semesters of master's degree work in coaching. I've been coached for the last 3+ years, 4 years now. Corey has set his life to do these things. It's PhD as well. So you want to make sure you join that, because coaching as a skill set is invaluable. I think it's something that anybody has that on your resume, it speaks volumes for companies today. So Dr. Wilks, thank you, sir. Appreciate your time, sharing your experience and expertise. I look forward to continuing the conversation next Tuesday. But tell us again where they can find you and more about what you're doing and what your next steps are.
Yeah, so my website is just CoreyWilksSciD.com. My doctorate is a PsyD. And I'm Corey Wilks PsyD across all channels, Twitter, YouTube, whatever. So yeah, Corey dropped in the chat. Corey Wilks PsyD, all my stuff, you can find it from there. And feel free to hit me up on my website or DM me on Twitter. My DMs are open if you have any other questions. Yeah, I'm available.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Corey. I like the Corey and Corey show. It's always fun to talk to you, my friend. And we'll be talking to you soon. Thanks everybody else for being here today, being a part of Post Status. These are some of the educational topics, training things that we want to keep pushing out there to help you learn and grow, be better for what you do in the world. So anyway, thanks, Corey. We'll see you later, everybody. Appreciate you.
Yep. Take it easy.